Ah, ok.
On s'assoit comme ça, on est tranquille.
Ok. C'est déjà 19h. Hein?
Ah, mais il est obligé d'attendre 5 minutes le temps que la salle se remplisse.
Ok.
Ça vous va?
Ok. Wait 5 minutes.
Fair enough. What's that? Yeah, we're early. So as a gift to you, you'll see a video in the talk that has perhaps a shout out to your childhood. We'll see.
Okay.
Tu l'as vu? It's 59 seconds.
Tu peux analyser par l'IA. C'est très bien.
J'ai besoin d'avoir quelques notes.
Mais c'est très bien, je suis comme toi aussi.
But one of them that I came
Comme toi.
across randomly
Ouais,
is
t'écris aussi.
children's cartoon.
Ça permet, ouais, pour les entretiens.
So we'll see if.
Une belle
First of all, we'll see if I'm right that it's Russian.
Mais non, mais ça permet de
We'll see if you have numbers.
Je peux une photo souvenir pour toi.
But I just wanted you to know that I thought of you as I edited it into my talk. And,
Merci.
it's a conscious shout out.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sergei Guriev. I'm a provost at Sciences Po, and we are here today, this evening, to launch our new institute, Open Institute for Digital Transformations, in French, Institut libre de transformation numérique. I will talk exactly why we called this institute like this. Sciences Po is a very special place to study digital transformations. Our motto is to understand this world and make a difference. Sciences Po is a very special university. It's a research university, international, European research university, but it's also a university which always tries to make an impact in terms of making our world better, making our society better. And this is tonight when we talk about one of the challenges that we as a society have to address, which is digital transformations. So we know that we are living in an unprecedented time. As a scholar of, I'm also studying some of the aspects of digital transformation. I can tell you, I see many young people here. You probably don't remember what the world was like, say, in 2007. How many people around the world would have access to mobile broadband? The answer would be 4%. Today in Europe, the number is more like 100%. So this is a technical change, technological change that we've never lived through, and it impacts all the aspects of society, economic, political, and social. And sometimes it brings enormous benefits, sometimes it raises various risks. And we here at Sciences Po, we think that these are the transversal challenges that have to be studied, analyzed by interdisciplinary approach. And this is exactly what our institute is all about. The institute is part of our tiered initiative, transforming education and research in emerging democracies, transforming interdisciplinary education and research in emerging democracies, financed by Program of Investment in the Future, PIA Qatar, French government's initiative, or sometimes it's called France 2030. This is a program which tries to bring together all the social sciences at Sciences Po and our partners outside of Sciences Po to study the challenges related to digital transformation and propose solutions. So this is a program, and the Institute is one of the 2 institutes which we are launching within this program. The other one has already been launched in the fall, the Institute of Environmental Transformation. So these are the institutes which bring together Sciences Po, the 5 disciplines which are law, economics, history, political science, and sociology, with other social sciences, and what's more important, the natural sciences and life sciences. We are, when we proposed these projects, we brought together our wonderful partners. There are 8 partners whose logos you can see here, which is CNRS, INRIA, Université Paris-Cité, INED, INSERM, IFRIMER, INALCO, and EDRI. And I see some of the representatives of the partners here. The idea is to work together to identify the challenges to our societies, also potential opportunities to benefit from this transformation and propose solutions. Myself, when I was a student like you, I actually studied computer science. I have a master's degree in computer science, and I have a lot of classmates who look down at social sciences. I have a daughter who studies math. She actually makes fun of me and my wife. We are economists. When we show her our data, she kind of looks down at the level of precision that we can have in social science. But honestly, and it's not just because I'm an economist now studying these issues from social science side, I would say this is very important that we involve social sciences, because unfortunately, if we only rely on our friends computer scientists who are here, but these are computer scientists who want to work with social sciences, right? Who don't look down at social scientists. If we only if we only involve software engineers, we may end up with the famous famous motto of Facebook, of Mark Zuckerberg, who said, "We need to move fast and break things." And unfortunately, we did break a lot of things in the last 15 years. And I think involving social sciences is a way forward to make sure that we break wrong things and keep and develop the right things. So for us, it is actually an opportunity, and that's why we involve both social sciences and natural sciences. So what is this project? This project involves all the 3 dimensions of the work of Sciences Po: teaching, research, and impact on societies, transfer of knowledge, development of impact on public policies. And in that sense, this is exactly what we are. So we already work on digital transformations in many parts of Sciences Po. Probably the most famous is Media Lab, designed and launched by my great predecessor, Bruno Latour. But it's not only. We have historians who work on digital subjects. We have economists. We have political scientists. We have sociologists, and you'll hear from some of them today. And when we actually count how many people work on those issues, you have about 15–20% of our faculty who work on those issues coming together. But it's about 40 members of permanent faculty and about 40 doctoral students who work, as I said, in different departments on those subjects. So we also already have courses on digital culture that students in the undergraduate program have to take. We are thinking about other projects, and we'll talk about those. We have already DigiLaw Clinic at the law school, where our legal scholars work on regulation and other legal issues related to technological transformation. In the hall, you also will see the Digital Atlas. This is the project developed by Media Lab. It's a great example of how we collect data and visualize data. And in that sense, we already have made a lot of progress, and we'll talk today about the future of the Institute. So I promise you to say why we call it open. So it is open in many ways. It is open exactly because it involves other disciplines, other social sciences, and natural sciences as well. It is also open in the sense it's an international institute. the issue of digital transformation is a global issue. We see that we need to bring together scholars and policymakers in all the countries to address the challenges that emerge. We are in Europe, and Europe is extremely important for those issues for various reasons we will discuss today. So I will not steal the thunder from the panels which will follow. It's also open in the sense that we are open to new methodologies and approaches. Again, something you will hear about today. We're also open in terms of open science. The Institute, like the whole of Sciences Po, is committed to open science for public participation in research design and activity, for transparency and ethical approach to doing research. So all these words come together. So we call our institute an open institute. So I will not actually talk too much about the activities of the institute, because that is the subject of future panels. But basically, as I said, the idea is to bring together teaching and research and develop solutions for the future, both proposing policymakers with the results of the research, but also training students for the future. Whatever you do, whichever school at Sciences Po you go to, the job market, the labor market for you, your careers, will not be protected from digital transformation. And so the question today, how we embrace digital transformation better to train you for the future, which is already here and is developing really fast. Once again, welcome to this exciting evening, and long live Open Institute for Digital Transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Là, cette libre de transformation numérique, c'est pas une école comme on
Thank you so much. And so European, interdisciplinary, future-oriented, but also very much toward open science and very much open to dive more into the Institute, Open Institute for Digital Transformation. I'm very happy to be with you, Jean-Philippe, the director, and Ethan Zuckerman, who's a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. The first time I met with you, it was already 14 years ago. It was in
2010.
Yeah, Oxford University for a TED conference. Julian Assange was in the room. That's a long, long time ago. But I'm very happy to have you to speak more. And the first question would be to Jean-Philippe. How do you envision the role of the Institute?
Thank you, Guillaume. I hope you can hear me. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here and launching this institute tonight. It's been 1 year we've been working on it, and it's quite moving to be finally in this room, which is just the right size. So I maybe repeat myself now that I've listened to the video, but to stress it again, it's a collective effort. That's what the institute is. It's a collective effort towards creating and changing the way we teach, the way we conduct research, the way we also disseminate knowledge about digital technologies, but also with digital technologies. And of course, Sergei stressed it very well. We already have a strong expertise around digital transformation in Sciences Po, master degrees, classes, excellent students, and many faculty members who are specialized in this topic. But we really want with this institute to take one step further and start to explore new thematics, to have all those faculty members from different departments working together in between history, economics, sociology, political sciences, and also explore some new thematics with our partners. So this is something which is very important, and that's why I'm talking about this long-distance relationship with other disciplines which are not originally in social sciences. And so we've been brainstorming for 1 year, actually, so it's a late launch, but it's a launch where we are happy to share some exciting news that we want to work together on those 5 different thematic avenues that we will try to give you a hint of with Ethan. I'll start with the 3 first thematics. The first one is about the question of the trust in science. So it's a question that obviously concerns everyone, and we live in this context where there's a rise of skeptical discourses about science, and of course we may suspect that digital platforms are responsible partly for those for this mistrust, this rise of mistrust, and we want to work on this to understand better the mechanism behind this mistrust, but also taking things in a more positive way to think and maybe identify or maybe invent some new ways to build technologies that would allow to build some dialogue between scientists, scientific institutions, and the society that would make more maybe a constructive discussion. The second topic we want to work on has to do with political participation at large. And so when you talk about political participation in this context of digital transformation, of course, very fast you'll see the usual suspects of technological tools which seem to be affecting our democratic principle. So you may think of recommendation algorithms which tend to foster polarization in our society. You may think of misinformation whose spread is threatening the elections all over the globe. You may think of many reasons like this, but there may be other reasons, and so that's also something we want to work. We want to think of how to really assess the impact of those technologies and think of other kinds of disorders which may be technological, which may not be technological, which may be socio-technical, as we used to say in STS, and which may account for this decay of trust in politics too. Third topic, I've tried not to be too long, which is about algorithms, and that's something we will have pleasure listening during the panel tonight. And it's not only algorithm, but it's more specifically AI algorithms, and we know that those AI algorithms, they tend to produce, to reproduce, to amplify a certain number of problems with equity. And so this happens in so many domains of application: health, education, human resources, what else? Healthcare policy, even if you think about election could work too. We know that there's an issue, but we need some help. We need to really face this difficulty and find ways to account for those discrimination, to account for those lack of equity, and find ways to combat them. I'll leave the floor to
And if these first themes seem very closely tied to policy, they are, and that's a big piece of what we're envisioning with the Institute, is a link between original research and also policy that can come and be brought into play throughout the EU, can sort of inform what's going on there. The fourth and fifth themes get maybe more into the sort of the pure research stage of things. In the fourth thematic, we're really interested in this idea of digital traces. This has really been a transformation of the social sciences. We are often able to use social media, the internet as a whole, as a place to collect and analyze data about human behavior. And frankly, do this at scale that really hasn't been able to be done before, but opening up all sorts of new ethical issues and challenges about what we can and cannot know, and also some really interesting policy questions, what we can and cannot study. But this is something that Jean-Philippe and I actually have become friends around, because we're both very much involved with trying to study questions like polarization through the traces that we can find on a network like Twitter or YouTube or something along those lines. The fifth thematic, I think, is the one that in many ways I'm the most excited about, and it's this idea of treating culture as data. So thinking about the idea that enormous amounts of cultural production are being generated and put online every moment, and there's actually quite new ways that we might be able to study some of these spaces, and I'm going to share some of that in the address that I give later today. But there's a very wide range of topics that we're hoping to encourage research around, with the common theme that we're looking for interdisciplinarity. We're looking for connections between the academic and the practical, the policy connections. We're looking not just within Sciences Po, but within this extraordinary set of partners that we have, and really looking internationally to all sorts of people we can reach out to and interact with.
So you spoke about mistrust, but you also spoke about working together, like Sergei, like Jean-Philippe stressed out. And do we still have reasons of hope in looking for the future, which is one of the aims of this institute?
So I'm here in no small part because I'm not only very hopeful about the internet, I'm actually very hopeful about Europe's role in the internet. Yeah. So my role here on this is as the president of the stakeholder committee, bringing in civil society, bringing in government, bringing in activists, bringing in all sorts of people to inform the work that we're doing. And believe it or not, the stakeholders include Americans. You know, we are certainly not the only stakeholders, but we are one of the minority groups represented within that. Around the world, people are looking at Europe right now as actually stepping up and effectively regulating the internet. Yeah. There's an enormous amount of excitement around the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and there's a real hope that European values applied to these platforms, which have really grown in some very unchecked ways, may be able to pull back some of the excesses. But I would say that I'm actually more excited about something else, which is I'm starting to see hints of a European vision for what an internet could look like that is rooted in those values, rather than just saying no to the excesses of the US and the Chinese internet, looking for ways to build an internet that is thinking about cultural preservation, that is thinking about transparency, that is thinking about the user as central. My hope is that if we start seeing that sort of affirmative vision coming out of Sciences Po, coming out of initiatives like this, maybe we make progress on some of these very scary political questions.
Good news, good news. Thank you. And just before we go on into more debates, because we've got lots of debates tonight, just wanted to have a quick opinion, point of view regarding the regulation on AI. We know that AI is very much important to the landscape of information. Do you think the European way can be interesting too?
I just had a coffee with one of the smartest people in this field, my colleague Beatrice Botero, who's sitting here in the front row, and she has a wonderful theory that we should start thinking about some of these AIs, some of these large language models, essentially as search engines. Because in many ways what they're doing is they're taking the entirety of information online and they're making it searchable through these queries. And what's lovely about that is that we already have a regulatory structure that says there are certain things we need to be able to do with search engines. I think the key on AI regulation is understanding that it's going to be a moving target for the next 10 or 20 years, and that we absolutely cannot afford to wait 10 or 20 years to do something. The idea of risk-based regulation, where we say there are certain actions that are simply so important, and you're seeing international consensus that perhaps we shouldn't let AI drop bombs. That's a pretty low, I'm going to go further and say that we probably don't want AIs doing hiring and firing and sort of life-changing decisions of any sort at this point. And we can re-examine this over time. But again, we need the combination of Europe finding a good way to say no, but then also an affirmative vision. What is it that we're going to say yes to? What is it that we're going to build?
Jean-Philippe, do you share this approach?
Yeah, definitely share this approach in terms of openness, as Sergei was stressing, meaning that the idea of the Institute is really to build, produce knowledge with students, with researchers, but also to participate in the public debate, and maybe more than that, meaning that we have the responsibility to also design new regulation for AI, but also to craft public policy which are really taking into account our definition of what justice should be, which we can also even, I think, go further down this road and think of Sciences Po as having a role and being a key actor in the production of new technology, innovative technology, as Sergei was saying, which as long as they serve a precise purpose, as long as they serve some public interest.
And then we can say yes. So thank you, Jean-Philippe, Ethan. Thanks a million for this. And then, so we speak with you again later.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. So we can applaud them. We're going to speak now about the democracies and the transforming information landscape. Please come on stage, Jan Schradje, who you are digital sociologist or Center for Research and Social Inequalities at Sciences Po. Have a seat, thank you. Pablo, you are a professor at Northwestern University and member of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton. Thank you for being with us. And Grégoire Lemarchand, you are editor-in-chief of investigation and digital at AFP. So we have lots of questions, but I try to be very quick, not to be late at the very beginning. So question which is an open question for the three of you. In the discourse, we've seen lots of technological transformations. We mentioned a few at the beginning of this conversation, like this is bad news, I'm sorry about that, micro-targeting, misinformation, foreign interference, polarization, AI-generated content. In the in this year context, where we see 2 billion people concerned by the election, what are the one you're watching more closely, if I may? Maybe Grégoire, if you want to.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
You're
just
at the biggest fake news redaction.
not the biggest fake news.
No. detection, correction.
So yes, thank you so much, Guillaume. So just to give you a quick understanding from where I'm talking. So I think I'm the only journalist tonight, apart you, Guillaume. So I'm the head of the digital investigation unit at AFP, Agence France Presse in Paris. And just to give you an idea, it's a unit of almost 150 journalists, working globally in 26 languages and focusing their work on digital investigation and fights against disinformation. Let's say fact-checking.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is one since 2017. This is one of the main editorial priority for AFP to fight against disinformation. So I'm not going to be very original tonight. I'm going to talk about AI and the threats of AI on the, let's say, on the threats on democracy and on the information ecosystem. Of course, we're talking a lot about AI from almost 1 year and a half, because we've seen, this great and stunning software of generated images like Midjourney, DALL-E, or whatever. And the questions we already have is, okay, these are going to be wonderful tools to disinform more and much efficiently. Yes, and the main question is the worst coming? Is the infocalypse coming, with these wonderful and incredible and freaky tools? I really don't know, but I just want to point out some things, and to be fully honest, I don't know if the worst is coming, but we're already in a very chaotic and worrying situation, and without any kind of AI content.
Mm-hmm.
Just to make you understand, in my position, I have the overview, as I said, 150 journalists we're producing globally, some investigations, some fact checks in 26 languages, so almost everywhere. And if there's a common point for everything we're writing down about disinformation is cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Is really cheap. It's dirty, it's cheap, and it's really, you don't need technology.
Yeah. It's not the more advanced tool.
No,
right?
Let's be honest. If you want to disinform, screen grabs, dirty screen grab, a screen grab of a screen grab, a photo of a screen grab of a screen grab,
Yeah.
It's always that it's no sources, no evidence, no statements. You don't need something sophisticated, and it's already really, really inefficient. So if my goal was to disinform, I don't need AI tools. I just need to drop some stuff, like randomly on many platforms, saying he said that, he's a pedophile, so and that's all. And you don't need more, And I think that now with the AI and these stunning images, I think the people are more, let's say, vigilant when it's sophisticated, and they are, more in really. I mean, if it's cheap, they believe. You know what I mean.
So it's both good and bad news at the same time, right?
Yes. And I remember, like 6 years ago, if I was there, maybe we had talked about deepfakes.
Yeah.
And everyone was, oh yeah, deepfakes are coming. But like 6-7 years after, if you've seen some deepfakes, these are deepfakes to say, oh, deepfakes is a danger. But we've never seen some real deepfakes, with a real effect on society. Maybe I'm wrong, but from my point of view, at least in France and in European countries, we've never seen some real deepfakes, having an effect, And now where we're talking about foreign interference, and if we see the Russian foreign interference in France, there's no deepfakes. There's not so much AI content, if none AI content.
Yeah.
These are really, really cheap fakes. And as I like this word, this definition from Claire Wardle that some of you may know. It's shallow fakes, you know. And it's interesting to see also, and that, you know, when we saw these softwares, you know, Midjourney, DALL-E, you know, everyone was making some images, you know, and we've all seen this incredible image of the Pope Francis with a Balenciaga coat. And I've made many tests with my team, and Midjourney was really the most impressive. And so there were lots of images. Most of them were really funny and not to spread disinformation. But like for 1 year, there's no more images coming from Midjourney. You know why? Because now you need to pay if you want to use Midjourney. There's no more free version. You know, it's not so expensive. It's like $10 a month. So it shows, you know, that people that want, if they want to disinform, they have no money and they are lazy.
But you told me maybe it's more dangerous with the voice, right?
Yes. So maybe yes. An exception is the voice. And for example, we're doing a lot of work in Africa, and most of the disinformation is spread by voice, you know, on WhatsApp or on Telegram. And there's a lot of deep fakes made by voice, you know, with free software. And that's interesting because when you see an image, when you see a fake video, you're going to find some clues or some evidence or some things that are a bit strange. When we're talking about voice, you have nothing than the voice. So it's interesting to see that, for example, and it's not a surprise, a lot of deep fakes audio from Emmanuel Macron in Africa, you know, in order to say, oh yes, it's the France-Afrique, etc. You know, they want to do some coup in some African countries. So, and it's quite efficient, I think, because it's really more difficult to detect any kind of manipulation in the voice, notably when you are not familiar with Emmanuel Macron's voice. So, yeah, and I don't want to talk too much, sorry, but I just want to highlight one thing is, yes, I'm not telling that AI will not have a big and a worrying effect on disinformation, on democracies, whatever, but you know, and we know the narrative, we know the taxes of those who are disinforming, and I think, like, if we to take an image or a metaphor, if you want to disinform, do you prefer to have some 3 B-52s that are huge and yet you see them coming from afar, or have thousands of landmines or snipers that are hiding, and you know, not all the landmines will explode, but every time one is exploding, it's really an issue. So I don't know what will happen. And just to end, sorry, to a more optimistic note, I think that AI and AI tools can be efficient for us as fact-checkers, journalists, or civil society, or all those who want to fight against disinformation, to have some more tools to detect, to be more efficient, etc., etc. So that's maybe the best way to talk about AI from my point of view.
Thank you, Grégoire. Jen and Pablo, do you think AI can help as well and to protect our democracies?
To protect our democracies. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Jean-Philippe and Ethan and everyone. This is a fantastic new institute, and I'm really excited to work with everyone. I mean, I think in some ways that's the question, right? We've had this pendulum swing of, you know, 15 years ago, as Ethan was talking about, right? That was kind of the pinnacle of this more utopian time, right? Where technology was going to save us, right? Twitter revolutions, Facebook revolutions. And now we're deep. I don't know if we're in the deepest of the more dystopian view of technology, right? That it's, you know, this evil villain, so to speak. And I think it's that way in which we tend to view technology as either a savior or villain that's the most dangerous. And in fact, I think in many ways, if we want to think about what's the most, you know, dangerous part of technology to democracy, it's the hyper-focus on technology itself, because it's too narrow to really understand what's going on more broadly, right? And we do know, you mentioned the, deep fakes and bots. There's always something new that's shiny that we really focus on, those of us who have been in the tech field, right, or you see on the news. And it's something that doesn't take into account history. I'm a sociologist, but I like to dabble in history, right? So if we think about, I was thinking about when you were talking about these deep fakes. So about 30 years ago, I remember in the US, there were a number of states where right before elections, Black voters were sent both postcards and what were called robocalls, right? Threatening them if they voted in the wrong place, they could be arrested, right? So it was using kind of deep fakes, right? Before the internet, before what we know now about this technology, and it's not new. We also know the rise of fascism and the rise of the far right and authoritarianism is also not new, right? Happened way before the digital era. And, if we think about, we've talked a lot about a lot of different research fields, and those of us who have been working in tech, tended to do a lot of research on Twitter, right? Yeah. And most of you may know that after, Musk took over, we can no longer do the same type of research on Twitter like we used to be able to do, not, to the same extent. And so, this hyper-focus not only on Twitter, but also researchers, way too much research, in my opinion, and again, I'm one of the people who's done research on Twitter, not only has it left us now without this access once Musk took over, but it doesn't really allow us to understand what's going on behind the tweets, people who aren't tweeting, right? So that's a really big issue right now with Gen AI. It's important and critical that we look at these questions of inequalities, especially around bias. But what's not talked about enough is that whose voices aren't in this whole online space where a lot of this information is going. And so, Ethan brought up this point around, AI being this new search tool, right? But again, we know from research, I and other digital inequality scholars have done research around how people who have more power more broadly, but are college educated, and have other advantages around gender, race, et cetera, are much more likely to have post online content. We know that from Wikipedia as well. And so, again, with this hyper focus on tech right now, and if we look at some of these threats to democracy, and I'm involved in a big project right now looking at disinformation, AI, a lot of these questions comparatively, and I think they're important, but we have to widen the scope. We have to zoom out and look at not only people who aren't online as much, who are more susceptible, but what is, the larger political context, right? So I'm finding tremendous difference between France and the US around the conception of these tools, et cetera, around this question of disinformation and various threats, et cetera. And so that type of research is really critical. So it was really nice to hear about some of these broader ways that the Institute as well is going to think about how technology matters more than, again, just looking at, the so-called, villainous platforms or politicians or platform owners, and not just looking at the top down, but also the bottom up as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's why maybe the Institute's going to be very useful in the future. What do you think? Do you see these differences of approach between?
I do. But first of all, I want to echo Jen's. It's congratulations to all of those involved in the launching of the Institute. I'm sure it will play a major role not only at Sciences Po, but also in France, Europe, and the world as well. And it's really an honor to be here. I want to echo a couple of things that Jen said. One is the role of history, but I will go back not 30 years, but a few centuries back, since the Middle Ages at least, what the scholarship, what the historical scholarship shows is every time there are new major disruptive technological developments, contemporaneously society reacts with a lot of fear, but over time, as far as the historical record goes, these innovations end up being taken up and reworked in beneficial ways to society, since manuscripts until very recently, even with social media in some ways. So the historical record gives us hope to think that there will be positive developments for society that usually emerge bottom up, not top down. And it's very important that when we do the thinking about this and when we do the research, we study not only what technologies do with people, for people, but also what people do with technology, right? The ways in which in everyday life, individuals, families, communities, regions, countries come up with interesting, unplanned, unforeseen solutions for their social problems. Those tend to be the most lasting ones in terms of the societal impact. That's one aspect. And in that sense, you ask about the technology that we focus most on. I would say that for most of the world, that is messaging services, in particular WhatsApp and mobile technologies. AI is behind some of the applications for that, but for the most part, most people in the world do not live in the fairly wealthy countries of the now so-called global north. And for them, the infrastructures of, say, WhatsApp, mobile telephony, et cetera, provide usually lots of solutions for lots of things having to do from daily life through commerce, profession, childcare, et cetera. So in that sense, as we think and research these technologies, I think it's very important, and piggybacking on Etha's important point about the role of Europe in the conversation, not to forget that most of the world's population do not live in the global north, do not live in the US, Canada, Europe, Japan, etc., but live outside. And that as we do research and as we think, we need to be inclusive of the entirety of this planet if we want to develop sustainable solutions.
Yeah, that's super interesting to have this perspective. And sometimes it can be more productive and more useful, right? For example, WhatsApp in Africa. Mm-hmm. As you said, do you think we should have also this perspective, this approach, Jens? Do you think that can be useful not to have only the European, US, and China-centric approach?
No, absolutely, and I loved that you brought up the messaging apps and WhatsApp, right? Because we see variation also. If we look at Brazil, right, there was been a lot of research on the use of WhatsApp, that a lot of very poor people in Brazil, it was a key tool that people were able to access and not other tools, and Bolsonaro was able to take advantage of that in terms of his election and win. But then most recently, last week, right, in Russia, Putin decided to really take, it was a buildup, but a very different approach. Initially, right, the idea was, let's keep the internet open so that we can do the very cheap ways to manipulate, right? There was this choice, right? Should we have a kind of closed, old Soviet-style system or a more open? And there was a very conscious choice to have it more open so that there could be the death of 1,000 cuts, right? You were talking about these little moments. But what changed last week is, Putin said, no, now we're going to start to clamp down on messaging apps like WhatsApp because they were a way that people were countering such a more authoritarian candidate, right? So very different uses. So, I think that's another reason why, we could come up with great research here in France or the US or elsewhere saying, this is what we found about this platform, and be really, tied to this view of this does that, right? TikTok, as they're saying in the US, right? It's going to destroy democracy in the US. But, the reality is these uses can be very different in different contexts, both within countries and also, of course, across countries.
Thank you. And Grégoire, with the newsroom you have in more than 20 countries, do you see the splinter being more splitted in the future, or do you see that it will never happen except China, for example? Or
Wow.
you have 2 minutes. No.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think I think what we are seeing right now, it's people are moving from the major platform and they're going elsewhere, like in more local and regional platforms, and it's getting more and more difficult because we need to monitor many platforms at one time, and they are moving more and more to open platforms or so-called open platforms to like messaging apps, and it's getting more and more difficult, and when now you're monitoring what's happening now in Ukraine, for example, or in the Middle East, everything is on Telegram first. It's on Facebook, it's on TikTok, it's on Twitter, but 2 days later, So monitoring Telegram is not as easy. It was, for example, like 5 years ago, we were all on TweetDeck or on Twitter, for example. So, we can talk to people from Meta, from TikTok. Let's try to have a conversation with someone from Telegram.
Yeah, but is it possible to?
I've never managed.
Yeah.
So, and we've tried many times,
Yes.
So
I think Pavel Durov has a French. Pavel Durov, the creator of Telegram, has a French passport, but it's very, very hard to see him.
I've never catch him, unfortunately. So we need to, and we need to be aware of that, and that's, I mean, the so-called open platforms are less and less open.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for example, if you know that there used to be a wonderful tool if you were monitoring the Meta ecosystem, Crowdtangle, and Crowdtangle is gonna be shut down mid-August. And that's a big loss because as only fact checkers, I know it's very interesting for academics, for other people, it's a huge loss. So we are now have access to the Meta content library, which was built for academics at the beginning, but well, it's just the beginning, we'll see. But so less open stuff on open platforms, and more people are on messaging apps, and it's really difficult to monitor. Yeah.
And maybe to finish with this democracy debate, I think there is another tool. There is an NGO that I like very much, which is Nothing to Hide. So they help a lot reporters, but also citizens in every part of the world where internet is being shut down, and which is a major problem they're saying. Maybe to finish on a more optimistic view, do you have ideas of how our democracies could protect themselves without cutting the internet, maybe without cutting technologies, or do you see initiatives that are interesting in your research?
So I think one way in which our societies can protect themselves is following the activists more rather than following the bureaucracies. There are always very interesting, revolutionary at times, developments that the activists in a bottom-up way bring up that maybe societies as a whole will benefit from scaling them up rather than thinking all the solutions would come from the bureaucracies or the experts.
Good point. Thank you. Jens, maybe a final word on this?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's, I think I loved what you said about looking at activists. I think that, for me, it's critical to not just look at technological fixes to these technological problems. That is a danger for many reasons, right? However, again, those of us may want to say how great it was in the early days, the early web, and it was really great, but there were also tremendous inequalities at that point. And it really has been due to activists and other people really working to enable more people not only to have basic access, and I want to push back on this a little bit, right? I think it's a myth that everyone does have regular, consistent access. And that is a persistent problem. We definitely saw it in COVID. And so I think some of the solutions, not only looking to activists, but having a wider variety of people participating in conversations like this, as well as research, but also on a more broad-based democratic level.
Thank you. Grégoire, maybe a final.
So I'm not going to be very original, and I want to insist on that. So I think regulation in Europe is key, is really key, and I'm really, really curious to know what will happen maybe in the 2-3 coming years with X/Twitter, because they are the first targeting by the European Commission, and it will be really interesting if they're going to hammerize X or not. I think it's the credibility of the DSA that at stake on this. So I'm really curious, and I think it's also, and that's what we're doing at IFP currently. I think, and from a journalistic and fact-checking point of view, I think we need to collaborate with the platforms. We're collaborating with them. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are a lot of questions around that, but around that, maybe a lot of people saying you must not, this is like fact-checking, washing, or whatever. But I think as we're collaborating with them, this is not perfect, but this is really interesting. And as fact-checkers, I think if we want to have any kind of effect, we need to be on the platform, so we need their help to be efficient on their platforms.
Thank you very much, Pablo, Vigent, and Grégoire. That was extremely interesting. And then we're gonna go into. Thank you. We're gonna go into projects from students and researchers. Please come in. Et on va maintenant parler en français et voir qu'il y a des pistes super intéressantes qui peuvent s'appuyer entre autres sur le projet Liberty. Alors, je vous propose donc Églantine de nous rejoindre. Installez-vous. Et je vais vous demander, si vous voulez bien, à tous les deux, vous avez lancé un projet. Ensuite, on vous écoutera, les chercheurs, de nous présenter un petit peu mon porte-voix. Pourquoi vous avez eu l'idée de ce projet et à quoi ça peut servir? Églantine.
Donc, bonsoir à tous. Alors, mon porte-voix est un projet étudiant qu'on a lancé l'année dernière dans le cadre de l'incubateur des politiques publiques de Sciences Po, de l'école d'affaires publiques, qui était en partenariat avec la direction du numérique du ministère de l'Intérieur. Donc, en fait, on a dû répondre à une problématique qui était vraiment très vaste, qui était comment redonner confiance aux citoyens dans les institutions à travers un système numérique qui repose sur un système décentralisé, efficace et sécurisé. Donc, vaste programme. Pour cela, on a utilisé les méthodes de design de services publics à travers 3 étapes, donc l'immersion, la conception et le prototypage, pour trouver justement une solution, un projet à présenter. Et en fait, on a rapidement identifié le vote, et en fait particulièrement l'abstention, comme étant justement un enjeu démocratique, d'autant plus qu'un rapport du Sénat expliquait qu'en fait, une partie de l'abstention, contrairement à ce qu'on pourrait croire à une volonté ou une expression politique de ne pas voter, était aussi tout simplement le fait de mal-inscription sur les listes électorales. C'est-à-dire que 6,5 millions de Français sont mal inscrits et ne peuvent pas voter. Donc pour cela, il existe quelque chose qui s'appelle la procuration. Mais finalement, en creusant un petit peu le sujet et en réalisant un sondage pour savoir un peu quel était le rapport des gens en général avec la procuration, on s'est vite rendu compte que, soit par manque de temps ou par phobie administrative, cette solution n'était pas toujours envisagée par les citoyens. C'est pour ça qu'on a développé mon porte-voix, qui est en fait un système de procuration totalement dématérialisé et totalement en ligne et qui veut répondre justement aux problèmes d'inclusion, que ce soit géographique ou pour les personnes à mobilité réduite, sans pour autant et nécessairement remplacer complètement la procuration en réel.
Merci beaucoup. Et Yann est à vos côtés. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer un petit peu les challenges technologiques, ou en tout cas surtout les outils qui sont mis à disposition, et est-ce qu'on pourrait aller aussi au-delà de la procuration?
Bonsoir. Alors, en fait, pour les challenges technologiques, on a eu la chance d'être aidé par une entreprise prestataire. Et donc, c'est eux qui nous ont permis de mettre en application toutes les idées qu'on avait eues. D'abord, les principaux challenges qu'on avait identifiés, c'était par rapport à la confiance. Quand on se rend à la mairie pour faire certifier son identité et pour ensuite posséder la procuration, c'est assez facile de faire confiance puisqu'on voit une personne en face de soi. Donc, de manière un peu instinctive, on a tendance à faire confiance à la personne. Quand c'est quelque chose d'entièrement dématérialisé, c'est beaucoup plus difficile. Donc, en fait, on a dû un peu travailler sur qu'est-ce qui faisait qu'un logiciel générait de la confiance ou bien de la défiance. Et globalement, on s'est rendu compte que la plupart du temps, c'était avant tout la facilité d'utilisation. Et c'est aussi pourquoi on avait choisi cette technologie. C'est que quand quelque chose est facile d'utilisation et qu'il paraît plutôt sécurisé, les utilisateurs ont tendance à faire confiance. Après, il y avait aussi l'aspect de la cybersécurité. Comme on traitait de données assez sensibles comme l'identité des personnes, il fallait que ça soit bien crypté, que ce soit quelque chose où il n'y ait pas un risque de cybersécurité. Donc, on avait pris cet enjeu-là dans notre expérimentation. Et enfin, nous, on avait travaillé avec une technologie blockchain. Donc, en fait, il y a plusieurs types de stockage des données dans le cadre de cette technologie, plutôt centralisé, ou donc un peu comme un serveur, tout est stocké en un seul endroit, ou bien très décentralisé, avec également le risque de confidentialité qu'il peut y avoir. Et donc, pour le coup, comme on avait choisi cette expérimentation dans le cadre de l'État, on s'était dit que avoir quelque chose de centralisé était mieux pour avoir cet entre-deux qui justement nous paraissait bien. Et en termes d'opportunités, nous, ce qu'on avait surtout identifié, c'était l'inclusion que permettait cette procédure. En effet, on a les personnes handicapées, les personnes qui peuvent être éloignées d'une mairie ou qui ne connaissent pas des gens qui font procuration. Proposer cette solution en ligne, ça permettait de les inclure dans le processus électoral. Et il y avait également les personnes qui n'avaient pas pour habitude en fait, de connaître les différentes procédures administratives et qui pouvaient avoir une solution beaucoup plus rapide à mettre en place. Et enfin, oui, on avait aussi vu pas mal d'opportunités pour l'interopérabilité de la technologie et la fluidité que ça pouvait générer vis-à-vis d'autres demandes administratives, par exemple. On avait identifié ça comme permettant des économies de coûts, tant en termes d'heures pour les salariés du public que pour les collectivités. Et donc, voilà, c'était ça les principales opportunités qu'on avait trouvées avec notre expérimentation.
Mais bravo, super expérimentation.
Merci.
Et cette approche justement décentralisée qui repose sur la confiance, l'historique, j'allais dire des transactions, mais là en l'occurrence des échanges que permet la blockchain, est-ce qu'elle pourrait être appliquée, à votre avis, à d'autres services publics et est-ce que vous avez parlé aussi avec d'autres entrepreneurs ou des étudiants qui avaient les mêmes idées à l'étranger ?
Alors, c'est vrai qu'une blockchain, c'est très coûteux à mettre en place. Donc,
ouais.
Quand on a développé le projet, alors pour l'instant, on était resté sur un cas très concret qui parle à tout le monde, mais on avait inscrit notre projet dans une roadmap beaucoup plus longue avec des réflexions autour de l'identité numérique, parce que de toute manière, à partir du moment où on veut donner procuration, il y a cette question de l'identité numérique qui est déjà travaillée au sein de l'État. Là, récemment, en France, l'identité a été lancée, même si ce n'est pas encore de l'identité numérique. Et en fait, la blockchain permet ce système de wallet, donc d'avoir tout un ensemble de services numériques. Et en fait, quand on travaille sur ce projet, on s'est beaucoup inspiré de quelque chose qui existe déjà, d'un modèle de démocratie numérique qui est très présent chez nos voisins estoniens.
Oui, bien sûr.
Donc voilà, l'Estonie, en fait, qui avait été victime de nombreuses cyberattaques de la part de la Russie, avait en fait reforgé tout son système de services publics numériques sur une blockchain. Donc comme le disait Yann, qui permet beaucoup d'interopérabilité. Et c'était une des raisons pour laquelle on avait choisi la blockchain pour justement en fait avoir une vision beaucoup plus large et beaucoup plus qui allait beaucoup plus loin que la simple procuration. Donc, que ça soit tout un tas de services en ligne publics qui reposent sur cette blockchain, ou également le vote. Je ne sais pas si tu veux...
Oui, en fait, on avait essayé de s'inscrire un peu dans le questionnement sur le vote en ligne. Nous, on avait choisi la procuration en ligne parce qu'on trouvait que c'était plus sécurisé que le vote en ligne, où il y avait aussi beaucoup de fantasmes liés on le voit aux États-Unis par exemple, avec le vote par courrier. Donc imaginons un vote en ligne en France, on n'avait pas envie forcément de s'aventurer sur ce terrain-là, mais en tout cas de le soumettre à réflexion sur si on devait un jour le faire, comment est-ce qu'on le ferait et comment générer de la confiance chez les citoyens. Mais effectivement, oui, il y a plein d'autres applications qu'on peut imaginer. Nous, on avait réfléchi par exemple au début à la procédure de demande des cartes d'identité. Parfois, c'est extrêmement long et on s'était dit qu'avec le choix de technologies plus adaptées, ça pourrait être plus transparent pour l'utilisateur, qui puisse voir en temps réel l'acheminement de son document d'identité et aussi permettre d'économiser des coûts pour l'État et de manière à accélérer le processus.
En tout cas, on peut que vous encourager parce que je trouve ça vraiment très pertinent, et pour être allé une fois en Estonie, on voit à quel point ça fonctionne super bien. C'est surtout assez dingue pour le citoyen, c'est-à-dire que moi ça m'avait marqué parce que ça m'est déjà arrivé dans la vraie vie lorsque vous perdez votre permis de conduire. En tout cas, on m'avait dit comment ça fonctionnait là-bas et c'était quand même beaucoup plus simple. Voilà, donc bravo, c'est super prometteur. On va maintenant parler avec, on a la chance d'avoir avec nous, et donc merci encore Églantine et Yann, restez avec nous. On a avec nous donc Kali et Kevin, donc vous êtes chercheurs du projet Liberty. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer en quoi consiste votre projet de recherche et comment ça peut peut-être faire naître des vocations?
Oui, bien sûr, et bonsoir Guillaume. Merci pour l'invitation d'être là pour discuter notre projet avec Project Liberty Institute qui a financé le projet. Très brièvement, notre projet avait deux objectifs. Objectif 1, c'est d'étudier les effets des réseaux sociaux sur les attitudes et comportements politiques et la santé mentale. Deuxième objectif, c'était de développer une approche philosophique solide pour faire face aux effets négatifs des réseaux sociaux. Pour réaliser ces objectifs, nous avons mené une expérience pendant les présidentielles de 2022 ici en France. Nous avons recruté environ 2000 Français qui utilisent le Facebook chaque jour. Et on a fait quelque chose d'intéressant. Nous avons les enseigné au hasard, c'était une expérience. Cette expérience, il y a deux groupes. Moitié fait partie d'un control group qui a continué à utiliser leur compte Facebook comme d'habitude. L'autre moitié, nous avons payé 80 € pour couper, c'est-à-dire désactiver le compte Facebook pendant le mois autour des élections. Après, nous avons interrogé avec des sondages de foi et on a mesuré nombreuses des choses. Qu'est-ce qu'on a découvert? Je n'ai pas le temps d'expliquer tout, mais pour être bref, il y a une mauvaise nouvelle et une bonne nouvelle. Okay? On commence avec la mauvaise nouvelle. Le Facebook rend ses utilisateurs moins contents, c'est-à-dire les participants qui ont désactivé le compte Facebook étaient plus contents à la fin d'études que celles qui ont gardé leur compte. Okay? C'est la mauvaise nouvelle. Une bonne nouvelle. Les personnes qui ont désactivé leur compte Facebook ont donné plus de réponses erronées sur la politique que celles qui ont continué à utiliser le compte normalement. C'est-à-dire, les personnes qui ont désactivé le compte Facebook en savent moins sur la politique. Bref, Facebook nous informe, mais nous rend moins contents aussi.
Kali, merci beaucoup. Kali, justement sur la pollution dont on a beaucoup parlé tout à l'heure, avec la polarisation, malheureusement on revient beaucoup dessus, les discours haineux. Est-ce que des initiatives permettent justement de tirer le meilleur et peut-être d'avoir d'autres bonnes nouvelles?
Oui, alors votre question m'amène à clarifier 3 points que notre recherche a permis de soulever et qui orientent en fait cette définition de ce que serait une bonne gouvernance. Premier point, la frontière poreuse entre ce qui relève du public et ce qui relève du privé, parce que les plateformes numériques forment un espace public à l'évidence, mais ce sont avant tout des espaces privés avec des conditions générales d'utilisation qui orientent les usages de ces plateformes. Donc, cette sphère numérique public se situe à la lisière entre le public et le privé, et la gouvernance, justement, se heurte à cette frontière poreuse. Deuxième point, il faut nuancer ce que vous mentionnez comme pollution, parce que bien sûr, il faut prendre la mesure de ces impacts négatifs sur le politique, mais en même temps, il faut aussi considérer le fait que les plateformes numériques, et en particulier les réseaux sociaux, sont devenus des vecteurs d'information prioritaires. Et c'est ce que Vin vient de mentionner. Dans notre étude, cela, on l'a vérifié. C'est-à-dire que si on désactive Facebook, on aura moins de phénomènes indésirables, mais les gens seront aussi moins informés. Donc, les réseaux sociaux ont remplacé jusqu'à un certain point, en fait, les médias traditionnels. Troisième point, il faut voir comment est-ce qu'on situe nos exigences envers une sphère publique numérique par rapport à une sphère publique qui n'est pas numérique. Et en fait, il faut voir qu'est-ce que l'on accepte. Faut voir que ce que l'on accepte dans une des sphères, on ne l'accepte pas forcément dans l'autre, parce qu'il y a des seuils différents, des codes, des sanctions, des impacts différents. Et demain, avec la démocratisation des technologies immersives, ces seuils changeront à nouveau, parce que des incivilités, des agressions seront plus ou moins facilitées, ressenties différemment. Donc en fait, les relations sociales qui transitent à travers les plateformes numériques sont et seront toujours modifiées, et cela, en fait, elles peuvent dévier plus ou moins facilement par rapport à nos valeurs démocratiques. Tout cela, l'ensemble de ces trois points que je vous propose, nous amène en fait à redéfinir ce que serait une bonne gouvernance. Et je vous propose 3 réflexions qui sont un peu l'apogée de nos recherches avec Vin et Martial, parce qu'on était 3. Donc, premier point, la question des risques. Et en fait, notre approche part du constat qu'il est insuffisant de se focaliser uniquement sur les risques et les problèmes, car il faut défendre des options normatives en amont, définir la vision des transformations numériques souhaitées, et cette vision peut alors informer la gouvernance des plateformes en lien avec l'innovation responsable et l'éthique. Deuxième point, il faut redéfinir les mécanismes de gouvernance en lien avec les enjeux économiques, et la gouvernance des plateformes repose au fond sur 2 formes de paternalisme qui se confrontent, un qui est légitime, légal et vertical parce qu'il est étatique et qui est réglementaire, et de l'autre un paternalisme, ce qu'on pourrait qualifier de paternalisme d'influence, qui repose en fait sur une approche beaucoup plus mercantile. Donc au cœur de la gouvernance des plateformes, il s'agit de réguler cette influence que les plateformes exercent, d'envisager des mécanismes complémentaires de sensibilisation du public et aussi des mécanismes d'indépendance des plateformes, tout en favorisant l'émergence d'autres modèles économiques et en incitant les plateformes à activer leurs leviers, parce qu'elles en ont, des leviers qui puissent orienter en fait les usages vers une voie plus éthique, plus saine, ce qu'en fait on a nommé dans notre étude des nudges éthiques. Et troisième et dernier point, la question de la souveraineté est aussi au cœur de cette bonne gouvernance. Et en fait, cette souveraineté, elle est économique, elle est politique, mais elle est surtout désormais infrastructurelle, puisque, s'agissant essentiellement de plateformes qui sont non européennes, on peut surréguler ces plateformes, mais elles reposent en fait sur des éléments aussi matériels, et cette indépendance que l'on souhaite, elle se situe aussi au niveau de l'infrastructure. Et pour l'obtenir, c'est une question d'investissement. Donc derrière ça, c'est aussi des choix politiques. Voilà.
Super conclusion, mais c'est vrai que qui amènerait énormément de questions. C'est comment justement peut-être favoriser l'émergence de ces champions, parce qu'on voit bien, enfin, on va le voir, je pense, dans les prochains mois avec le jeu de chat à la souris dans lequel vont se prêter les plateformes avec les nouvelles régulations européennes. Peut-être je voulais vous entendre, alors c'est une question à tous les 4, vous parliez tout à l'heure, Kelly, de plateformes plus immersives. On le voit quand on peut tester par exemple l'Apple Vision Pro, c'est vraiment une expérience assez dingue. Et puis peut-être, j'ai envie de dire, ça fait un peu peur aussi, mais les expériences que rend public un certain Elon Musk, dont on parle un peu trop tout le temps, mais bon, on est encore un peu obligé, désolé, avec son expérience Neuralink qui fait quand même assez peur, c'est-à-dire qu'il vend ça comme une expérience thérapeutique, mais on se rend bien compte, lorsqu'il parle de télépathie, bien que on ne sait pas trop si quelqu'un sait exactement ce qu'on pense à tout moment et puis peut-être voudra un jour contrôler nos pensées. Donc il y aura ces régulations à mettre en place, peut-être pour avoir quand même un peu une note positive, hein, parce qu'on a quand même envie d'espérer, de croire encore en ces technologies. Sur ce nudge dont vous parliez, est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner peut-être un... C'est quoi cette piste en fait pour mieux comprendre en fait enfin, pour être très clair, on voit de plus en plus de plateformes immersives qui peuvent faire un peu peur. Et comment en fait réguler ou en tout cas encourager des champions européens?
Je pense que c'est une question, c'est difficile de répondre en fait, parce que je crois que Ethan a expliqué que c'est en fait qu'est-ce qu'on étudie maintenant, c'est un cible mouvant. Donc voilà. Mais ce que je pense, c'est chaque intervention, dispositif qu'on développe pour répondre à ces peurs, des craintes qui sont créées par chaque développement technologique, il faut qu'on le fasse dans une façon qui est, on pense, très profonde, comment de construire des outils, des dispositifs qui marchent. Et en plus, parce que nous sommes tous utilisés des expériences dans notre recherche, et c'est en fait d'examiner et de tester si ce qu'on développe pour répondre aux fake news, à la polarisation, n'importe quoi, en fait, ça marche. Et je crois, pour moi, je pense, parce que je sais qu'il y a des gens qui se méfient des approches expérimentales, parce que voilà, on joue avec des personnes. Mais pour moi, si les méthodes expérimentales, en fait, nous permettent d'étudier l'efficacité des interventions potentielles, tout comme des vaccins. Pour savoir si les vaccins marchent, il faut avoir une expérience. Sinon, on peut peut-être appliquer des choses qui ne marchent pas, ou qui ne marchent pas très bien, et on pense qu'en fait, on fait quelque chose qu'on ne fait pas.
Bien sûr. Allez-y, Kelly.
Oui, juste pour compléter, en fait, c'est la question de l'anticipation des technologies émergentes. Comment avoir une régulation par anticipation? Comment voir ce que ça peut donner? On n'a pas vraiment de réponse à ça, mais en tout cas, dans notre étude, de façon très modeste, les nudges éthiques étaient assez limités. C'était vraiment essayer de voir quels étaient les angles morts de la régulation des plateformes actuellement, et de voir aussi, au-delà de l'approche réglementaire, comment on pourrait imaginer d'autres formes complémentaires, bien sûr, à celle de la seule régulation. Comment faire en sorte que les plateformes soient responsabilisées. Bon, c'est assez mainstream comme discours, mais c'est quoi derrière les mécanismes incitatifs en fait, pour faire en sorte que les plateformes puissent activer leur levier parce qu'elles en ont? Et elles peuvent effectivement, comme je disais tout à l'heure, orienter les usages différemment, de façon plus responsable. La question, c'est qu'est-ce qu'on leur donne pour les inciter dans cette voie.
C'est une prise de conscience salutaire. Vous avez raison. Merci beaucoup pour Kali et Kevin pour ces travaux de recherche passionnants. Et puis, cette super initiative, mon porte-voix que l'on doit à Églantine et Yann, bravo à tous les deux. Et merci beaucoup à vous quatre.
Merci.
So now we're going to speak about the algorithmic justice and the inequalities. And I invite to be with me Benoît Loutrel, Béatrice Bolero et Benoît Rotembourg. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So to speak about the power of the algorithmics. These algorithms are making decisions across different sectors of society. We just mentioned them: education, information, health, social services. Why and how are they making certain choice remain sometimes opaque? So we don't know they're gonna orient us. And the fairness of these automatic decisions is increasingly being questioned. So I have a few questions for you. So where do we see the discriminatory impact of algorithmic decision making? Maybe if you have an opinion about that. And also, how do we identify this discriminatory approach? If you, maybe you want to go first? Yeah.
And I'll start by thanking Jean-Philippe and everyone for having us here. It's really an honor to be here and in this esteemed panel. So I think one of the things that we are seeing is that algorithms are being adopted everywhere in the economy, in social life. We see them on our phones. And the challenge of the question of how do we see algorithms discriminating is that what algorithms do is discriminate. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a lawyer, and that is also what the law is about. It's about drawing categories and figuring out how we go about life based on those categories. My Spotify algorithm suggests a couple of songs here and there, and that's okay. The challenge is, I think, that algorithms enable choice making at scale, at very, very vast scale, at a scale that we maybe hadn't seen before, and they do so in ways that's often very hard to understand. And because of hard design, and as they are adopted in critical elements of our society, so not necessarily my choice of music in the morning, but who gets a subsidy, who gets into college, who gets a medical treatment, when those decisions are unfair and are badly made, they can harm a lot of people, and that happens. We've seen examples of that in the media often, too often these days. But because they are opaque and because oftentimes they're very good, it's very hard to notice, and we are noticing too late. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. I think other people have.
So, Benoit, you told me that you do some research on the positive and the negative impacts of technology. So, what's your point about the algorithms?
I think it's important to look a little bit under the radar of what we see of big scandals on artificial intelligence. I mean, under the radar, there is what we are doing every day on internet. I think we buy something like 5,000 euros per year in average on internet, something like this in France. It means that we emit something like 200, 300 clicks per day on our terminal device. And those clicks are giving a description of us to Amazon, to our favorite bank, to our favorite telco. So we give information. So the bias that we create describing us is a fantastic source of information for the algorithms in front of us. They know us pretty well. And I think the bias, the discrimination made by those algorithms are their purpose. This is their job. They are super efficient. I've been doing pricing software for 20 years. The job is to discriminate. You can accept a little higher price because maybe you're a guy or you're hurried, I don't know, or you're late, and maybe your neighbor is not ready to pay that much. And I want to discriminate you from you on Netflix, on Amazon. So I think we need we need a way to understand how this discrimination works. And is it acceptable? Yeah. And it's partially our fault because we betray ourselves. If you buy Yves Rocher, if you read Marie Claire, if you love pink textile, you betray yourself. And I will use this betrayal to sell you something a little bit higher because you love the pink. So I think globally, how to under the radar in our daily lives, how to look at those little effects. Maybe it's €1. It's enough to make lots of money, €1 on 1 billion transactions. And this is where I think there is a bit of unfairness.
Yeah.
which is there is an asymmetry of information between your practice, my practice on the web, and what the algorithm know from us.
And Benoit,
Big asymmetry.
Yeah, you told me that in RIA, it's sometimes difficult to have information from the platforms, right? Do you?
Yeah, it's the same. I think someone, Ethan, mentioned it. I mean, it's extremely hard to hack and to disguise yourself in order to simulate, let's say, typical female behavior, typical old guy behavior on Amazon or on. So it's extremely difficult to obtain it because you betray yourself. If you use a robot, maybe the platform will detect that you are a robot. And authorities, when they want to regulate, to observe those platforms, have also lots of difficulties. So I think it's a game in itself to be able to reduce the asymmetry of information. What do they know? What does this algorithm know from me? Mm-hmm. And how I am discriminated to obtain something, or something sometimes very innocent, but it might be something far more, let's say, with far more consequences.
And if you ask the platforms to cooperate, what do they tell you? It's sometimes...
I can have a joker here?
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's difficult because they accept to operate with certain conditions. Mm-hmm. Typically, if you discover something, you have to show us before, etc. So it's super difficult. So I think it's we see it with data activists like ProPublica or lots of very efficient data activists that deep dive into the behavior of those algorithms, and we can obtain from them. So it's a form of journalism, new form of journalism. It's not fact-checking, it's behavior checking. But it's so important.
Thank you. Let's speak now with the other Benoit, the Benoit from the ARCOM, the regulator. Do we have too many algorithms in our lives, and how can we live with them?
Well, thank you very much for this question. I guess at this point, normally you should be convinced that we live in a digital world. There is algorithm everywhere, and we don't know what is the real aim and what are the side effects. And you have been, the previous roundtable, the world regulator was used, I don't know how many times. So if you allow me, I would like to take you in 3 minutes through what is the Digital Services Act. I'm supposed to teach that at Sciences Po in a longer time frame, but the truth, it can be done in 3 minutes. When you look at a regulatory framework, you always have 3 parts: objectives, toolbox, governance. What are the objectives of the Digital Services Act? The objective was set very clearly by the head of the European governments a couple of years ago. They were saying, we're facing informational disorders, crisis after crisis, hate speech, online terrorism, harassment of young people, disinformation, and we are not sure whether the big platforms are part of the solution or part of the issue. Your only objective is to make sure the platform from now on will be part of the solution. That is the only objective of the DSA, to create a greater accountability of platforms. Then, what is a toolbox? You need instruments to regulate. And we thought, oh, we need so many instruments, and we need so many information, because that is the heart of any regulation. If you have the information, you know how to regulate. So we say, okay, let's build that, but platform is so huge, we are going to need incredible number of engineers, of data scientists to face the power of the global players. And at that time, we were just thinking of the nice, crazy Californians. We didn't have yet in the picture the Chinese or the Russian. And at some point, we were realizing, oh my God, if we do that, the regulator, we know the name of the regulator, so I wrote it down because I can never remember. This regulator will be called Roskomnadzor, which is the name of the Russian regulator, communication regulator. When you have built such a huge regulator with such powerful strength, that's the model of the authoritarian states, and there is an equivalent in China. This thing cannot work in a democracy. So we went back to the drawing table saying, how do we build the design of the regulation? And we realized at the heart of the issue is this, and it was mentioned in this roundtable and the previous one, is the asymmetry of information. The platforms have too many information. Collectively, our society, we don't have enough information. What is the real aim of the algorithm? What are the real side effects, unintended effect, bias of the algorithm? How do we fight this asymmetry of information in a democratic way? Well, we empower our society. What is the strength of democracy? The strength of democracy is that we believe in the strength of the citizens. Where do we have the knowledge? Here, you are the knowledge. You build the knowledge. So at the heart of the DSA, you have the idea that we have to fix this asymmetry of information, make sure that academics are happy. Academics are happy in a digital world if they can access data. So that's the heart of the DSA. Article 40, any academics should have access to the information needed to implement his research, to make sure that the platforms are really accountable and are really engaged in fighting to maintain the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is what unite us in the EU. So here, at this point, I would like to introduce the Chief Happiness Officer of the academic world. He's sitting over there. He's called Bruno Schmutz. Bruno, can you stand up, please? Yes, thank you, Bruno. Bruno is the director of ARCOM, and he has 2 policy officers here who are hiding, who are laughing. And the 3 of them, their task is to make sure that academics will have access to data and that you will have the capacity to produce the knowledge. Because once you have the knowledge, we will have rebalance the relationship between the platforms on our society, and we will have done that in a democratic way, enhancing the trust in our society. So that's why tonight I'm so happy to be here for the launch of this new institute, because this is part of the solution and you are part of regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A big part of the solution, thank you. Beatrice, we know that with the algorithm, sometimes there is a lack of information, and maybe we hope it's going to not be anymore the case with the regulation, but there are also another problem, which are the bias. Where do they come from, and how can we fight them, or do we need to fight them, to your opinion?
Yeah, thank you. So algorithms are decision-making systems made of code. A lot of the bias comes from the data with which they are trained. So if the algorithm is rather well calibrated, it will distinguish cats from dogs, as some of you might have seen online. But if we never teach them how dogs look like, then maybe if it sees like a French bulldog that looks a little bit like a cat, it'll get confused and think it's a cat. That's a very bad example. I didn't plan for it, but I hope you got my point. So a lot of the challenges of algorithmic bias comes from bad databases. And the problem with that is something that was also mentioned in the previous panel, which is that because algorithms are trained with real-world data, they tend to replicate real-world biases, but then entrench it, and it's very hard to notice because they're opaque and they're at scale. So if we live in a society that favors men over women in certain contexts, and we train algorithms with that data, then the algorithm is going to give an answer where, in an instance where maybe a man and a woman are in equal footing, it might favor the man, and so on and so forth with all of the marginal categories and so on. So a lot of it comes with the data, and a lot of the work that we see happening is related to building fair databases and so on, which is actually a very complicated normative question because we live in an unequal world, and so we need to, it's also an opportunity to calibrate algorithms to fix some of those inequalities. But then again, one of the challenges that we have as researchers is that that's very hard to know. A lot of how researchers do that is by stress testing algorithms in small experiments. We've relied a lot on scraping data from the platforms, which makes it very hard to do it at scale and really understand how YouTube looks like or how TikTok looks like. Some of the best information that we had was from when Twitter was called Twitter, and they had a somewhat reasonable API. But in that specific example, for example, if you think about internet algorithms, the internet is kind of nasty. It's also wonderful, but we do a lot of annoying things in there, and so it's no surprise that those algorithms replicate that content. So I would say a lot of the biases come from the data. Some of them come also from like bad calibration and bad programming.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Benoit, can we avoid bias? Or?
First, once we have detected it, starting point, there is hope, and I will play the tech solutionist guy. I'm sorry, it's a bit of in area, but I think there is some laziness in the simplistic algorithms that just overperform on one very simple objective. So I think when you work a little bit on quality, on robustness of algorithms, you can incorporate with some form of symbolic constraints. I don't want to see male favorished with regard to women. I don't want to see that. Probably if you model it as a counterfactual, I don't want a similar man to these women to receive a different treatment from these women. So a counterfactual, a clean one. Clean one, which is you have to, everything equal, you have to really build your counterfactual. Probably you can force your algorithm to be counterfactually resistant. So it's a tough job. I don't say it's easy, but if companies like banks, insurances that have something like hundreds of AI algorithms looking at you, okay, to avoid losing you or to avoid, to get a debt from you, to retrieve a debt from you. If you look at all those hundreds of algorithms, there is lots of laziness. So as professional of building algorithms, we could incorporate, we have to have the need of it. It will create a kind of balance between performance and robustness vis-à-vis fairness. I see it as a form of constraint. You are not allowed to create a gap between men and women or old guys and young guys. To give you one very simplistic example, when you have a debt, so you owe 20 euros, you owe 20 euros to your telco. You forgot to pay your invoice, okay? By the way, if you are 10 years younger than me, you will pay your debt 1 day later than I will do. It means that the algorithms in charge of sending you very nice SMS textos or very aggressive textos, they know you will pay a little bit later than I will pay. And if you're a woman, it's 1 day less. And if you are a mademoiselle and not a madame, it's still 1 day less. So if we don't force the algorithm to say no, you cannot do a different treatment from a mademoiselle to a madame, a very French example, I'm sorry. But it's not allowed anymore, but it exists in the data set. Of course it exists. But a difference of treatment might be just forbidden. And it's quite easy, and you underperform a little bit, but you can really incorporate symbolic constraints saying, I don't want to see that. A subpopulation that I don't like to see discriminated with regard to another population. So I'm optimistic in that sense, because laziness can be corrected if there is incentive. Today there is no incentive. Outside the company, a little bit of regulation, but it's difficult. So it has to, I'm speaking about the AI Act, that will force stuff like this for the banks and insurances, typically. And then it has to go inside the company with a guy in charge of saying, you are lazy. And innovation is not opposed to fairness.
Is it also the way we are building the technologies of tomorrow, right? Because if you listen to Yann Lequin, who is a professor at New York University, but also at the head of AI for Meta, is working on a project, JEPA project. He wants the robots to be able to have a sense about the physical world. He wants the robots of the future to be nurtured by other things that the data that the man's going to give to him. So do you see in the way we build the AI for the future, do you see these kind of problems also, or do you, I'm just asking you as a tech guy, you know, the AI of the future, do you still be dependent of the data we're going to nurture with them?
If I follow the philosophy of Yann Lequin, which is...
yeah, controversial.
No, it's arrogant for me to say that I've understood what he said.
Yeah.
But I would say the more you add model of the world into AI, the more you will put into those models not only constraints, you cannot do this, you will fall. If you go closer to me, you will fall. It's a bit difficult if it's not been written in a text. And this is the argument of Yann Lequin. But so the more we model the world, the more constrained the recommendation will be. So this is positive. What I think is more positive is if we incorporate models like this, those models will be probably a bit easier to observe by a human being. So a human controller can probably, in a more easy way, say, I don't want to see that, or I would prefer to see that, because my company has an ethic rule and would like to see that. So I think it goes in a good direction. Of course, the power is also increased by this technology.
Yeah.
So if we don't control it, the risk is higher. So positive and negative in this vision.
Very interesting.
Which I share, by the way.
Yeah, very interesting. Very quick one also to the other Benoît Loutrel, about the fact that, you know, when we speak about the digital rights management and for the future, we say today it's the human who nurtures the machine. The machine's gonna. We see that between when the New York Times versus OpenAI, for example. New York Times is saying that OpenAI takes all the data from the New York Times, but in the future, OpenAI is saying that in the future, machines gonna nurture themselves from other data from machine. Do you anticipate this, and how can the regulator follow this, find solutions in this world if it's going to happen?
I guess the regulator is a regulator in a way.
An enabler also. No?
Yeah, is already lost. Huh? How many data scientists do we have? We are going for a model where we are not trying to internalize all the skills that are needed. So we are really going in this empowerment model. This being said, we, of course, keep focusing on how our information ecosystem is working. And clearly, I guess the future of AI will only be positive to the extent that there is a future for transparency.
Yeah.
It can only work hand in hand. If we don't succeed in developing the instrument to ensure the algorithm transparency, which do not require us to infringe on the intellectual property, secret des affaires, but rather to make sure that we have the instrument to create the trust that everybody can reliably think, okay, I know what is the aim of this algorithm, and I know that we collectively have the capacity to detect unsolicited outcomes, the bias. If we can do that, yes, we may reach at some point what you are describing, but it will have to go hand in hand. If not, we will lose the trust, and trust is the oxygen of democracy.
Thank you. Beatrice, very quickly about the algorithm of the future. In your dreams, how would they look like?
The algorithms of the future?
Yeah, in your dreams.
Wow. The algorithms of the present are already very impressive. I guess the algorithms of the future perform well and don't enhance a bunch of harmful patterns that we have already in the world and entrench them, which is actually why I am a big fan of the DSA approach that forces companies, and especially the largest ones, to conduct all sorts of impact assessments and risk assessments and share those with regulators and researchers. But I think that even internally, just the obligation to make sure that you're testing your tools and making sure they are doing what they're supposed to do and not harming people unintentionally, because I don't think many of these things happen more by neglect and laziness. So I think the fact that we are trying to get rid of laziness is a good thing. One of the things that I'll add to your comment earlier is that there's a lot of smart people working on this, and so it's interesting to see, for example, for those of us who've been following ChatGPT for a year and a half now, that it's gotten much better at dealing with very simple bias. So you would ask it a year and a half ago to tell you the name of 10 famous researchers, and the 10 were American, and the 10 were guys, and 5 of those were dead. And now, it actually, because it's been fine-tuned and they have content moderation teams, it will shuffle in some women, shuffle in some Global South, there will also be Europeans. And so I think, by all means, I don't think OpenAI is the example of many things, but it just shows that it's something that the industry can do, and that forcing them and also collaborating with them for doing it better can lead to good outcomes. So I think more than the algorithm of the future, I'm interested more in the institutional and collaborational kind of infrastructure in which algorithms are deployed and designed.
Thank you.
So that works for society.
Thank you so much. And this is one of the aims of some European creators, like the ones from Mistral. Like if you ask them who are the inventor of the aviation, not only saying the Wright brothers, but also Clément Ader. That's one of the premises. So thank you, Béatrice. Thank you, Benoît and Benoît. And that was extremely interesting for such a hot topic, algorithm and inequalities. And then we're gonna have Ethan back again. So Ethan, thank you. So Ethan has many lives. He's a professor, as we just said before. He's also a researcher. He's been a startup creator. I think...
No, you can stay right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to have your word, your perspective about the... Please, Ethan.
Well, thank you so much. I thought that I was actually going to be giving a talk about culture as data. Yeah. But I'm realizing actually what I'm going to do is speak to my friends at Arcom with a wish list. But actually it's the same talk. I haven't actually changed any slides. But what I really want to talk about is traces that we leave behind as we go through our lives, and how we might, as scholars, learn from those traces. And if I could get my slides up, that would be wonderful, please. Terrific, thank you. So I want to start by actually looking at a very strange and wonderful archive. And it's an archive in Budapest, in Hungary. It's actually the Open Society Archives. It's located in this gorgeous department store. And in the basement of this former department store are miles of shelves containing the material history of the end of communism. So there are everything from the key documents that had to do with the dissolution of the Soviet Union to lots and lots of ephemera. Things like postcards that were sent to Radio Free Europe with people requesting the songs that they wanted to hear on the radio, which was sort of one of the rare moments of having a taste of Western pop music. My friend Istvan Rev has run this archive for many, many years, and one of his favorite things in this archive is a set of photographs. And I have to tell you, the photographs are very ordinary, and that's actually sort of the point. They are photos from everyday life in Hungary between 1983 and 1988. And you will recognize that that is an interesting moment in which to have a trove of photographs. This is a moment at which Hungary is going to change forever. As the wall comes down, as communism comes to an end, this wonderful living room is not going to look like this anymore. There are going to be all sorts of influences. Some of the cultural practices that are happening at this moment in time are going to change, or they're going to decay, or they're going to disappear entirely. And the only reason we have this archive is because many of these photos are really bad photographs. In fact, what happened was when you sent your photo film in to be processed, you could check a box and say, give me only the good pictures. If you checked that box, the bad pictures ended up on rolls of film that ended up being saved by the photo processor. And these are those photos. These are the bad photos taken between 1983 and 1988 in Hungary and processed by the National Film Processor. And they now exist as these sort of half-meter wide rolls of photographs that represent a very interesting challenge for archivists. The archivists who work on this refer to this as a silent archive. And the reason it is a silent archive is that it is a very troubled archive. We do not have permission to use any of these photos. No one had any reason to believe that when they sent their photo to Fotofo, that it would end up in the Open Society archives years after the fact. We have no metadata, we have no way of making sense out of this. But at the same time, this is a priceless set of cultural traces precisely because what tends to get remembered is the elites, the famous moments. We do not remember what outfits people were wearing to school. We do not remember what the kitchen table looks like in 1983. We are discovering as historians that often the quotidian, the everyday, is utterly critical in understanding what's happening in society. There's been a tremendous transformation in how we study Pompeii, right? The city buried under 4 to 8 meters of ash in the year 79. When archaeologists begin excavating Pompeii, they are looking for the most beautiful villas, they are looking for the greatest works of art, and at this point, what we are really interested in is what was in people's cooking pots. In fact, probably the best scholarship that has been done on Pompeii is scholarship about graffiti. And graffiti is everywhere in Pompeii, and it's beautifully preserved. It is not necessarily, as we think of it, scratched into the bathroom stall. It's public writing, and it happens in all sorts of ways. We can see graffiti celebrating the gladiators of the day. We can see graffiti written outside a tavern where men are competing for the affections of a barmaid by essentially insulting each other and complaining that the other one is sort of blocking the other one's advances. This is important because the Latin that we have learned, many of us in school, is the Latin that is coming down from these celebrated texts. It is not actually the Vulgate. It's not what people actually spoke. We now know an enormous amount about how people actually sounded, what they actually said, what they actually thought. One of my favorite details reading about this, people actually liked Nero. They turned out to hate his wife, but they were actually kind of into the emperor himself. So, I want to present what I think our Pompeii is going to look like. And maybe it needs to be buried under 4 meters of ash, but at the moment we still have access
Here
to
it is. The falling snow.
Vehicle has just over 116,000 miles.
To live for Jesus.
How diamonds are mined in different countries.
This is what happens when you ignore that ticking sound that it makes. It chews up the cam real bad.
Чи шампанське, чи коньяк, аби випить на дурняк.
As a girl, Kamala is a rare hardcore Marvel fan.
That's right.
What you're seeing here is 59 seconds of true random YouTube. And by the way, I mean truly random. And let me explain. It's hard to get truly random YouTube. Here's what we've done in our lab. YouTube URLs have a very specific string associated with it. They have 11 characters. It turns out, for the computer scientists in the crowd, the address space is 2 to the 64. For those of you who don't do a lot of math in your head, that's about 18 quintillion possible YouTube videos. Rather than going to search engines, rather than looking at recommendations, we guessed numbers between 0 and 18 quintillion. We found some ways to do this guessing very efficiently, but basically the way that we studied YouTube is as if you took your phone and started dialing phone numbers at random to see how many people have phones in Paris. And it turns out that this works. When you do this, you can find out some very interesting things. So for instance, I can tell you that as of Monday, there are roughly 14.58 billion findable videos on YouTube. I can tell you how fast YouTube is growing. I can tell you that the average YouTube, the median YouTube video, has 41 views. So all the YouTube videos you've seen in your life with 10,000, 100,000, 100 million, you are at the very, very, very top of the pyramid. The average YouTube looks entirely different from this. So we are now making this information available. You can go to tubestats.org. You can find out exactly how big YouTube is, exactly how fast it's growing. You can find out our guesses at what languages YouTube is in. I will tell you that 35% of YouTube is in English, 11% is in Hindi. French comes in about 10th, but we're finding some fascinating things from doing this. Here's the thing. We shouldn't have had to do this, right? This should be available. You should be able to ask YouTube how big is YouTube and how fast it was growing. It took me 2 years to do this, and some very smart people. But we are now finding that we can study YouTube in some interesting ways. So here are some things I want to tell you. The first is that YouTube is not what you think it is. We all assume that if you're putting something on YouTube, it's because you want to be famous and you want to be seen millions of times. You want to be the next Rick Ashley. And this happens sometimes, right? Rick Ashley, categorically the center of YouTube, with 17 million views. He is at the 100th percentile. He's as popular as you could get. But here's someone who has failed to be famous. Here is my TED Talk. It is not very successful. It only has about 50,000 views. That still puts me just shy of the 99th percentile. And yes, at the top of YouTube, it is a broadcast platform. It is people trying to be seen millions of times. But now I want to take you to the 66th percentile. We're still quite high up in YouTube. And this is the school board meeting of my local school board. And it has 160 views. But let's talk about that for a moment. If my local school board meeting gets 1 million views, something has gone very badly wrong, right? They are not playing the same game as Rick Ashley or I am playing. They are putting this up on YouTube for transparency, for archiving, for reasons that really have nothing to do with trying to capture a large audience. And what I want to suggest is that the vast majority of YouTube fits some very different logics and some very different purposes that we are used to thinking about. It's what I call quotidian YouTube. It's what most of us are using YouTube for, and you saw it in that video. It's everything from advertisements. It's people live streaming church services. About 3% of the sample that we've looked at is religious services. It's moments from family. It's moments from prayer. It's people streaming video games. It's so many people streaming video games. It's about 25% of the videos we found are just people playing video games. And we're finding ways to sort of look at these things in chunks. At that very, very high end, you have the professional creators. A little bit lower down, you have professional content that didn't work. It didn't go viral. Then you have this really rich space of people doing advertisement, people doing public events, people doing streaming, people doing archiving. And then at the end, when you're down below 30 page views, you're really getting to people using YouTube much more like a social network as a way of connecting with family and friends. There are ways to study the high end of this. There are people who index Mr. Beast and all the other giant creators out there, and you can find them. And there's lots of researchers, including probably some in this room, who have gone down the path of following YouTube recommendations. But I will tell you, you will mostly get stuff of 10,000 views and above, and that puts you in the top 2% of those 14 billion videos that have been created. If you want to get this stuff, you have to use a random sample. And that, as we will talk about in just a moment, leads to some very interesting ethical concerns. Where we are most excited right now is pulling this apart by language. Our theory is that if we take these videos, by the way, we throw them at OpenAI's Whisper software. We have gotten very good at figuring out what a confidence level on Whisper actually gives you confidence on language. And then we can parcel them out. And so then we can say, okay, what if we only look at the Hindi videos? What if we only look at the South Korean videos? Well, let me tell you two stories. The South Korean videos are disproportionately news, and they are disproportionately right-wing news. And the hypothesis that we're trying to study and trying to explore is that we think the South Korean right wing moved onto YouTube after the president got impeached and they felt like there was no space for them in the official media. But the Hindi stuff is really fascinating because it's actually very personal, very intimate videos, and they are usually seen by fewer than 40 people, but they have very high levels of interaction. They have lots of comments, they have lots of likes, they have lots of people interacting with them. We think that basically YouTube in Hindi is used in parallel with WhatsApp. It's the repository, it's the way you deliver the content using WhatsApp as the social network. And we have to study this by using the metadata to figure out what to look at and then having researchers look at it. And we have to do it carefully. When you look at these Hungarian photographs, if you look closely, you will see that they are pixelated. And that was the right decision. That's the right way to handle material that we do not have permission to use. This is quite different. These are public documents. We are not getting any hidden videos, but we are also not releasing these URLs in general to the general public. We are talking very carefully with researchers about the dangers of re-identification and the dangers of someone essentially trying to track down whoever this crazy person is who's made the falling snow video. But we are able to offer an enormous amount of information just from the model. You can look at our model, you can take a video of yours and see how it ranks as far as attention. So why are we studying this? We're looking for the creator point of view. Right now, we tend to think of social media in terms of its effect on audiences. What is mis or disinformation doing to us as a society? But we are also a society of creators. And that experience of creating media and putting it out in the world, this is something we need to pay attention to. We are thinking about the denominator problem. When we look at a piece of misinformation, we can say that reached an audience of 100,000. But we're not very good at saying, what's the total audience? How many videos in total? How many views in total? This starts getting us towards proportionality. When we look at the bad stuff, what share of the whole corpus is it, and what share of what we're paying attention to is it? But beyond that, we think this gives us a new way of studying archives. We should be able to look at video and say, on French YouTube, how is 2007 different from 2017, different from 2024? And I think we can learn something really profound from that. But here is the problem. It took my lab 2 years to write the tools to do this. we continue to maintain them, and we expect any time now to be shut down by YouTube. And the reason we expect this is that the toolkit for researchers like me is getting more sparse every day, at least in the United States. We have lost our tools for studying Twitter. We have lost our most powerful tools for studying Reddit. We are losing our most powerful tools for studying Facebook. Already, we are watching tools that we rely on, like Botometer, which can tell whether a Twitter account is controlled by a robot or not. This has been forced to be discontinued because of Twitter's decisions regarding its API. And we are seeing, even more scary than this, researchers like myself getting sued when we're putting information out there that ends up being unflattering to the platforms. And I have gone as far to say that we are in danger of the internet becoming unknowable. And so I am here in part to suggest that we cannot allow the internet to become unknowable. And I'm thrilled that we have friends from ARCOM here. I'm thrilled that we can look and think about DSA in terms of questions of how do we interrogate algorithms and how do we make sure of fairness. But I want to ask you to think about something as well, and I want to ask you to think about Pompeii. I want to ask you to think about how we are going to remember this extraordinary moment in time where over the course of about 10 years, we got to the point where literally everyone in Europe was making, creating, and disseminating media and putting it out into the world. It is an enormously transformative social moment. We are only scratching the surface of what we might be able to do with this. Whether or not we will be able to continue doing this has a lot to do with how my European friends work with us and pick this up. But I want to challenge you to think about this opportunity to look at this digital culture that we are jointly creating as an archive that we are building in real time and that we can start studying going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Jean-Philippe. And a final word from Jean-Philippe, maybe?
Yeah, final word, but very short, just to thank you, Ethan, again for your support and your help. It's been very uplifting to have you with us during the last week and the last talk too. And thank you very much for having so patient over this spring night with us. We're looking forward to keeping on working together. We have a website opening and new activities coming in the next month. So keep posted. Thank you very much.